Welcome to episode number 7 of Purkey Horror Picture Show, all about the movie from 1955, Tarantula.
I knew Leo G. Carroll was over a barrel when Tarantula took to the hill.
Alright, this is directed by Jack Arnold, who also directed It Came from Outer Space, as we mentioned before. If memory serves correct, he was also the one who did Creature of the Black Lagoon and The Incredible Shrinking Man. Tarantula stars John Agar and Leo G. Carroll. Also, the love interest of sorts is Mara Corday. Unusually, all three characters are doctors/scientists. Leo G. Carroll plays the professor. John Agar plays Matt Hastings. I think he's more of a medical doctor, but he obviously has a scientific background. And then Mara is a scientific assistant, like a college graduate, I think, or just about to graduate college. So she comes to become the assistant of Leo G. Carroll's character. So you've got a couple giant bug movies that everyone has probably heard of. One of them being Tarantula, and the other one being Them. Them is probably the best giant bug movie ever made. I'm trying to think if there's any that are better than that. I'd think Them is probably it, which is giant ants. If you've never seen Them, that is an excellent movie. This movie is a good movie. It's a solid movie. One thing I noticed a little unusual about this movie is it has a cold open. And in the 50s, this is what, 1955, I don't even think even in the 60s that much, maybe a little bit, but in the 50s, I don't remember very many movies having cold opens. So, for everyone pretty much knows what a cold open is. If you don't, it's you start with some sort of a scene before the title comes up, and then the title comes up, and that kind of kicks off the whole movie. Is that they're trying to do an autopsy on this guy and figure out what happened to him, and oh my gosh, this is a guy that one of the professors that used to work with Leo G. Carroll's character, and why does he look so messed up, and on and on. So anyway. Shortly after that, we get to meet the professor, and you see his lab. And one of the best parts of the movie is this early part with the lab, where you get to see he's got giant rabbits and a giant guinea pig and a giant tarantula, and they're all in cages. And what it turns out has been happening is he's been trying to test this nutrient. Super nutrient that's supposed to help solve world hunger. So once again, it's kind of classic mad scientist stuff. He's doing it for the greater of mankind, but he goes out to a degree that causes, damage to the world. And it even shows like he's been tracking the days, and after 6 days, how much have these things grown? And they make a point of showing a baby rat, and the baby rat has grown to like the size of a full-size rat in just a few hours with this super nutrient. The reason it's super is that he puts a radioactive isotope into it. And you would think, oh, well, that's not a great idea. But back in those days, radioactivity could be the solution for everything and dangerous. And almost all of these giant movies, and I didn't mention, so you got giant bug movies, but you've also got giant people movies too, like was it The Incredible 50-Foot Woman or something like that? There's another one, The Amazing Colossal Man, I want to say. There's a couple of those, I believe. And The Incredible Shrinking Man, which we mentioned, which is another one that the same director made. I think all of those are based on radioactivity. So this is, of course, after World War II, after the atomic bombs. So atomic energy and atomic danger is kind of in the public consciousness. So they use a radioactive isotope, and watching them handle it is pretty fun. They have they don't have much to protect them. They basically just have like a little glass visor over their face, kind of like you would use, not even when you're welding, not even that strong. Just like the kind of glass visor you would put over your, or plexi visor you'd put over your face just to keep stuff from splashing into it. And then they have some little tongs and a little shield, like a little lead shield, I guess it is. And they're using the tongs to like lift up the vials of the radioactive stuff. But I mean, that's not going to protect them, obviously. But in those days, I guess that was enough protection, apparently. So what basically kicks off the plot is you see the lab. The one guy who had escaped had been one of the colleagues of the professor who had injected himself with the serum. And another colleague was there still who had injected himself with the serum as well. I guess it basically makes you get all deformed and it makes you go crazy. So the crazy one that was still alive comes into his lab. He has a fight with the professor. And in the fight, the glass cage of the tarantula is busted open. The professor gets knocked out, so he doesn't know that the tarantula has escaped. He thinks there's a fire that's shortly after that burns up all the other animals. So he assumes that the spider was burned up with the other animals. The spider at that point is about the size of like a large dog. And then of course later it's giant. So the second part of the movie is basically watching the young doctor and woman discover that something's up, something's amiss. The doctor is starting to get deformed and they don't know why. The main professor, is starting to get deformed, they don't know why. And there are starting to be some mysterious killings. They're finding cattle that have been skinned down to bones.
And found them.
I don't suppose it could have been mountain lions.
I've ranched here 22 years now, Doc, and I've had more than my share of lions and wolves. It wasn't them.
Where'd that come from?
With mysterious liquid nearby. Then they find a person that's been killed with mysterious liquid nearby. They figure out the liquid is basically spider venom, obviously. And then from there on, it's basically monsters, giant monster versus the people. So it's a little more traditional than a lot of the ones we've had. A lot of the ones we had have been a little more out there and mad scientist-y. This has a mad scientist element, but essentially it's a giant monster tarantula, rampaging around for the last third of the movie. And how are they going to deal with that? Some of the effects are pretty good. I think they mostly use probably rear projection, and for those of you who don't know rear projection, it's kind of like an early version of green screen, although they might have used some green screen in this. But I think rear projection was you'd basically have a screen, project your movie onto the screen from behind the screen, so that way you could have people in front of the screen acting out against whatever was on the screen behind them. So you have a video of a spider crawling around on the screen behind them, and then you have them like monster. There's also some practical effects. You get a giant spider, face and against a window, which is really cool. You got a couple giant spider legs, I think, kind of flopping into the into the sets when he's attacking a house at one point. And then towards the final battle, a couple things that kind of caught my eye were you've got the mention that they're going to use napalm on it. And this is in 1955. I don't believe, and this is something where I'm not quite old enough to know this, even though I'm pretty old, I don't believe that napalm was in the public consciousness until the Vietnam conflict, because obviously it became notoriously horrible in use in Vietnam. I'm assuming it did exist before then, obviously. They had it in this movie. But I don't remember it being something that people really were generally aware of. And there's a fighter pilot brought in towards the end, and it is Clint Eastwood. You can't even tell because his face is covered, but his voice is definitely Clint Eastwood.
All right, Bent. Fire 2 rockets on this first pass.
And I've seen a couple posts say that was Clint Eastwood in a very early role. And then eventually, I think around that time, he ended up going into TV, and then of course, everyone knows what happened in the 60s and 70s. Like some of the other movies we've had, it's a sympathetic monster and really a sympathetic scientist. No one's really a bad guy in this movie, which is kind of unique. The spider is just being a spider, and they actually don't really demonize the spider. There's a point early on, which is another classic old school movie technique where they pull up the movie and they show the movie to us and they show the movie to the character, and it's just like exposition time.
3 inches in size. Now there it is coming out of its burrow. You got 8 legs, can move faster than you think.
And it's just like, here's what spiders do, and blah 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 blah. And it's even saying, you know, like they're not deadly. They're just tarantulas. They'll hurt you like a bee sting. So it was really accurate as far as what tarantulas actually are. Not saying like, well, they're the most horrible thing in the world. They're going to kill you. But then, of course, they say, well, if it's the size of a house, it's pretty deadly, which it is. So that was kind of cool. And the scientist himself wasn't a bad guy. He didn't have evil intent. He wasn't even really trying to do anything but survive. And he got injected with the stuff from someone who got crazed. So he was just kind of went too far with his research, and that was kind of the deal. So overall, a fun watch if you're into old sci-fi monster movies. You'll definitely enjoy it, but I wouldn't say it's a run out and see it, whereas I say something like King Kong or Forbidden Planet would definitely be more, if you're into movies, definitely check those ones out. This one is more like you're into sci-fi and old 50s stuff and you'd like to check it out. And you're more of a completist, then I think that this movie would be on your list. I remember seeing this movie when I was a little kid, probably, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years old or something. So it kind of stuck in my head because of that. And it's a spider. But now it's probably about a 3 out of 5 for me compared to some of the other ones we've talked about. So that was Tarantula. Next up is going to be The Day of the Triffids. Now, I'm guessing hardly anybody out there has seen The Day of the Triffids. I have. I saw it back in the day. Well, I saw Day of the Triffids probably back in the 80s. And I haven't seen it since then, so I'm curious to check it out again. See you soon.
To the